Hello and welcome to the State of Shakespeare. I'm Garrett Vandermeer. Jim Elliott is away today, but today in the studio we have JaMeeka Holloway-Burrell. Welcome, JaMeeka.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. JaMeeka is a freelance director, playwright, and the founder and artistic director of the Black Ops Theater Company in Durham, North Carolina, and the founder of the Bull City Black Theater Festival. She's worked at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and Playmakers Repertory, among other theaters, and is directing the upcoming production of Twelfth Night at Shakespeare in Detroit. How'd I do?
Did great. That's great. That's me. That's me in a nutshell.
We're so glad to have you with us today. And as I was reading through your bio, I noticed that Black Ops is a relatively new endeavor
Yeah.
for you.
Black Ops is my baby. I mean, Black Ops is just so close to my heart. So after spending a few years away, after leaving undergrad, I moved to New York and worked at the Lark Play Development Center and was really, really lucky to get a personal assistant job with a playwright, Katori Hall, writer of The Mountaintop. And got to work with her for a good about a year and a half. And then I went down to Cape May Stage and was there as a company management resident. And I came back to North Carolina I was in the process of figuring out what my next move was, because since I was like 21, I had been bouncing around through New York and different places in Jersey.
So you went to undergrad. Did you go for theater?
I did. I went to undergrad for theater management, but kind of got swept up into tech and became a stage manager. So directing actually is fairly new. Directing for me is just as new as Black Ops is.
And what brought you to New York originally?
Coming out of undergrad, it's just like rites of passage. You go to New York. In my mind, I'm just like, okay, if I'm not a struggling artist, if my life is not mirroring Rent, I am not. I am not a good artist. My work is not validated. So I took off to New York, and I had about $1,800 in my pocket. But I went and thankfully, got to work at the Lark Play Development Center, and there's where I met Katori, and I was able to sustain myself for about a year and a half as a personal assistant. Her show, The Mountaintop, was going to Broadway, and then she had another show, Hurt Village, opening up at the Signature Theater. So things were really, really robust.
Yeah, you were working for her at a very exciting time in her
At
career.
a very exciting time, yeah, and I'm so grateful for that experience.
And you didn't go directly to North Carolina after you left New York. You mentioned you went to the...
Yep, Cape May, New Jersey, which is the most southern Jersey that you can get. You can go. So at that point I was still trying to inch my way back south.
And then you returned. Do you return to North Carolina?
Yeah, I returned to North Carolina, and I started to see shows, and a lot of my friends were working in the local theater scene. And I realized that there was like this dire lack of representation on the stage. And for me, that's not about bodies, because people are putting bodies of color up on the stage. We see that all the time, colorblind casting. But I was really, really heartbroken about the lack of narratives that we got to see on the stage, especially those that concern people of color and women. And so I started Black Ops because I'm like, I don't like what I'm seeing. Let me put up what I want to see. And so that's actually it was very pragmatic, very simple that way. I'm like,
So Black Ops is about story generation as much as anything else?
absolutely, absolutely. Because for me, we just get so caught up in seeing these very negative depictions of Black life, and oftentimes, even when we tell stories of about women, there are always these stories of resilience and us overcoming. And I was really, really interested in just seeing us navigate mundane lives. Not having to do anything spectacular to be validated or for our humanity to be recognized. So that's what I aim for with Black Ops. I'm always looking for stories, and oftentimes to find stories like that, I don't always use Black playwrights, because sometimes I'm just like, oh, I just want to put people in the story, and then I want, I'd like our identity to give life to them naturally and authentically. So one of the shows that we did recently was The Typographer's Dream by Adam Bach, who's one of my favorite playwrights, and I would go see
Hmm.
his work down at Club Thumb in New York when I was there. And the show was about a typographer, a geographer, and a stenographer. And I was like, oh, I want to put some Black bodies inside. And it had never been done before, but I wanted to put um, these Black bodies inside of these roles where we were not having to discuss race. We weren't having to, again, defend our humanity and why we deserve to live. We were just talking about people with normal jobs and how they make it through. And I really, and that's what I'm really, really drawn to. I'm really interested in us thinking about imagining worlds beyond our own and what we're always consuming in the theater and on television.
How do you achieve that? How do you bring these stories? How do you find these stories? How do you bring them to life? And how do they
Uh,
manifest themselves?
Yeah, I'm such an avid play reader. I mean, I'm always reading plays. It's like my thing to do. People, my friends will ask me out, and I'll say, "Oh no, I can't go out tonight," and they're like, "Oh, she just got a shipment from Amazon of new plays." Yeah. So I'm, always reading stories. I, feel most connected to the world through storytelling. So I find a lot of my comfort inside of plays. Where I come from a pretty low socio economic background, and really was able to find my escape while growing up through the different stories that were presented to me. So yeah, I'm always reading plays to be comforted and to feel connected to the world. Even as a theater artist, people think that I'm extroverted, but I'm very, very introverted, and in plays is where, inside of stories is where I feel most at home.
Boy, I can really relate to that. I mean, theater making is so, oh boy, it's such a social enterprise, such a people
Yes,
enterprise. But the idea of reading plays and inhabiting characters is very, very solitary pursuit.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, like you mentioned, I talked to a lot of people who feel like they really only feel like they're in their own skins when they're on stage inhabiting a character.
Absolutely. And I think, and because always, there's been so much madness around us in the world. I mean, decade after decade. And it is something, it's something really, really safe about being able to put someone else's story on. And just kind of be seen differently than the way people perceive you initially. So yeah, I identify with that as well. And it's one of the reasons why I've come to love Shakespeare, because I was not always, I'm not like I didn't come up on Shakespeare. But I do love that his worlds are so fantastical that no matter who you are or where you come from, you can always find a place for you inside of one of Shakespeare's world,
Uh
so
huh.
so there's always room to just kind of flow in between worlds, and I love that.
How did you discover that you loved it?
Of working at OSF. So
Uh huh.
I went up, yeah. So I applied to be a part of the fair program at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival about a year ago, and was one of the lucky folks who got accepted into the program. And one of the reasons why I wanted to work at OSF was because I wanted to. Explore my legs as a director, and then also because I wanted, as a theater administrator and somebody who runs their own company, I wanted to work at the organization with like one of the highest budgets to kind of see, I just kind of like, I want to see how you guys work. Yeah, and so I was very diligent about taking notes and gleaning as much as I could. But I got a chance to work on Mary Wives of Windsor,
Hmm.
and one of my favorite people to sit with when I was in the rehearsal room, I mean, obviously the director, but I really loved to sit with the voice and diction director, and
And
please edit this out because I cannot. David Carey is his name. But David Carey and I would really just love to sit with him and kind of dive into text with him. And once I realized that Shakespeare was really speaking my language, as someone who came from comes from like urban America, and to realize that Shakespeare was like just as much of a pop star as any pop person that we could think of right now who's like making popular entertainment so that they can feed themselves and pay their bills and build their status. The work was just very easy for me to gel with. I think like this idea of Shakespeare supremacy, it's like one of those things that kind of always kept me away from him. But to actually like really
What do
sit down with David Carey and for him to say, okay, so actually think about this the way you think about like a hip hop song, was really eye opening for me. And that barrier throughout that time just began to come down. And even working with Dawn Monique Williams, she was doing Mary Wives of Windsor, but she said it in the 1980s. And so we've got like Belle Biv DeVoe hip hop music. We've got Prince and Michael Jackson. And all of this like new age music was still bringing this very classic world to life. I was very stimulated by that, and to work on to work on like Mary Wives of Windsor, which I feel like is one of Shakespeare's hardest plays because there's so many stories to try to track.
I have to admit, I've seen that play once. It's not one that I've studied. It's not one that I know very
Yeah,
well at all. I know it's a comedy, and I know
it's
that
a comedy,
it
but
features a
they're like,
character like Falstaff in it, right?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then, but there's so many, there are like six subplots that are going on, and Shakespeare gives you a bit, and then he forgets about it, and then he brings it back up at the end. So you're like, wait, where did that go? And what's happened with the time? And I think that that is another thing that made me fall in love with Shakespeare. I'm like, there's so many fallacies in this work, like when it comes to like keeping up with time and again tracking stories and being consistent. I'm like, oh, Shakespeare is just, he's a regular guy who loved theater and art, and music the way that I do. So I was really able to just connect when I was like, oh, when you get out of this mind that he's like this grand figure, which he is, but I think to approach the work, for me, and again, like I always approach Shakespeare as if I'm looking at a new play. So I'm always like trying to just like find like what's contemporary and what's hip about this. And that really ties the story in for me so much more.
So that brings us to the play that you're directing at
Twelfth
Shakespeare in
Night.
Detroit. So what Twelfth Night? And are
Yes.
you in rehearsals already? Am I reaching you in Detroit? Are you there now?
Yes, you're reaching me in Detroit. We had our first read yesterday. And actually, I just want to give a shout out to the artistic director of Shakespeare in Detroit, Sam White, who I actually met through the FAIR program at OSF. She was the Paul Nicholson Fellow when I was there as an assistant director. And so we connected that way and really got to talk about, she really listened to me as I thought about different ways that I can reimagine some of the classics, especially Love, Labor's Lost. It's always been a favorite of mine. And so that's actually kind of what led to this job that, the door opening at OSF led to me being here at Shakespeare in Detroit. And I'm just so grateful.
What's exciting you about Twelfth Night?
So what's exciting me about 12th Night is so we are going to set 12th Night inside of like the renaissance of like the 20s and the 30s in Detroit. And I'm super, super excited about that. I'm also super excited about, having this change. So I've seen 12th Night lots of times. And I think, being a director of this show actually gives me the opportunity to rectify some of the things that I've been so confused about oftentimes. I mean, like, questions like, when exactly does Viola fall in love with the Duke? Like, when does that moment actually happen? Because I think like the play can be so fast paced that you can lose that very easily. Like, when did this happen? Okay, now, so she just got off this boat. I mean, she just got off the
Right.
shipwreck, and now she's working for the Duke, and then all of a sudden she's in love with him. So I, like actually being able to actually produce moments that highlight the love taking place, the
Hmm.
falling in love that takes place in between these two characters is something that feels really, really important to me. And then also I always am remiss that Mariah sets up this grand plan. And then she disappears. Where did she go?
That's true.
It just drives me nuts. And so actually, when cutting this play, so all of Fabian's parts Now I moved to Mariah. That's also, I was always confused about, okay, when does Fabian come in and take over Festi? And so I think I was able to clear that up by handing many of those lines over to Mariah.
So are you doing this with, otherwise, are you doing it with a full cast of characters? Are you doing it with a lot of doubling of characters? How's that working out?
So yeah, so the only roles that we double are Curio, Valentine, and we marry their roles with I mean
Hmm.
they are double cast as like the sailor, I mean the sea captain, the priest that marries
Hmm.
Sebastian and Olivia, but otherwise no, we've got a full cast.
And it sounds like you're excited to be in Detroit. I want to ask you about Shakespeare in Detroit, because it sounds like the company is about to undergo some exciting new changes
Mhm.
in terms of venue. What's going on?
So I don't know all the details, but I do know that they are, and this has been announced, and Sam was recently in Forbes magazine speaking about this, but they did just acquire a riverfront location for, for their, so they're going dark after 12th night and will spend the next year dark and will come back in 2020 with the new season and an all new space on the riverfront, which is so exciting. Because right now what a lot of people don't see, they see this like constant work coming from Shakespeare in Detroit, but don't realize that it's like a two-person machine.
Uh-huh.
There's the production manager, and then there's Sam, who facilitates like artistic direction and managerial things. And so it's a two-person machine here, and they're really thriving. And yeah, I'm just again just really grateful to be a part of this. And if you ever get the opportunity to interview Sam White, the pleasure will be all yours. Let me tell you.
Well, we're going to try to take you up on that. Now, your cast, where do they come from?
Yeah, so I was actually in Detroit earlier this year. Sam flew us up to host auditions. So a lot of the folks are local, are Detroit locals. And then our Viola and Sebastian are actually a husband and wife couple that Sam and I met also at the fair program at OSF. So, so I really love that. So through this fair program at OSF, which in fair is, for people who don't know, fellowships, assistantships, internships, and residencies. And they really try to bring together folks who they see as potential leaders in the field, the theater field, and just the relationships that we're able to make and create and take with us from that program have just been so invaluable. So yeah, we've got a fair crew here. So we've got a fair crew, someone from the fair program producing this show, directing the show, and then also playing Sebastian. Along with his wife, who was a company member at OSF in 2017. Yeah.
And one last question, because I'm so curious about Detroit. I was born there, but I haven't spent a lot of time there
What?
in the last, yeah, not since I was very small. And
Mm-hmm.
and my impression of Detroit is sort of formed by the Detroit of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand that Detroit has changed a lot since then. So tell me about some of your impressions about living and working in Detroit of 2018.
Yeah. So actually, I was saying to one of the patrons last night, because we actually had an invited first read, so a few people came, and I said you can actually feel the resilience of the people. Like as you're driving in your car or walking down the street, like you can feel like this resilience from the people of Detroit. It just kind of like radiates from them. This a lot of will and tenacity to keep going, even when like all of the odds have been stacked against Detroit in a lot of ways. I mean, systemically, inside of like their education systems. But these are people who refuse to give up. And I mean, as you can see, like there's a Shakespeare company in Detroit who is actually really thriving and moving to this riverfront property.
That's excellent. JaMeeka, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, this has been a pleasure. This is great. I listen to you guys all the time. I was just listening about a week ago to your interview with Bedlam about Twelfth Night and What You Will. So yeah, I listen to you guys all the time. So this was such a treat. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been a delight. Thank you, and thank you all for listening to The State of Shakespeare.